It has been a life-changing experience to be here. I mean, I travel a lot in front of a lot of different audiences, but I am always continually in awe of teachers who are the real magicians. And I'm very honored that you gave me a place among you today. And thank you very much for everything, Linda. You're a miracle worker, seriously. Um, so, I'm going to start out by introducing you to my mother, Annie Pearl Smith of Aliceville, Alabama. In the 1950s, along with thousands of other apprehensive but determined Southerners, their eyes locked on the second incarnation of the North Star, she packed up her whole life and headed for the city with its tenements, its promise, and its rows of factories like open mouths feeding on hope. One day, my mom got up and she got dressed and she put her Baptist ski slope of a hat on her head and she said, I'm going downtown. And I said, what are you going to do? You going shopping? She said, no, I'm going to meet with my English teacher. And this is the poem that came from that. Jittery immigrant at 64, my mother is learning English. Pulling rubbery cinnamon-tinged holes to a roll beneath her knees, sporting one swirling ski slope of a hat, she rides the rattling elevator to a windy city spire and pulls back her gulp as the elevator hurtles toward heaven. Then she's stiffly seated at a scarred oak table across from a white government-sanctioned savior who has dedicated 8 hours a week to straightening afflicted black tongues. She guides my mother patiently through lazy ings and ers, slowly scraping her throat clean of the moist and raging infection of Aliceville, Alabama. There are barely muttered apologies for colored sounds. There is much beginning again. I want to talk right before I die. Want to stop saying ain't and I done been like I ain't got no sense. I'm a grown woman. I done lived too long to be stupid, acting like I just got off the boat. My mother has never been on a boat. But 50 years ago, merely a million of her, clutching strapped cases, Jet's Emmett Till issue, and thick-peppered chicken wings in waxed bags, stepped off hot rumbling buses at northern stations, in Detroit, in Philly, in the bricked cornfield of Chicago. Brushing stubborn scarlet dust from their shoes, they said, we're north now, slinging it in backdoor syllable, as if those 3 words were vessels big enough to hold country folks' overwrought ideas of light. Back then, my mother thought it a modern miracle, this new living in a box stacked upon other boxes, where every flat surface reeked of Lysol and effort, and chubby roaches, cross-eyed with raid, dragged themselves across freshly washed dishes and dropped dizzy from the ceiling into our Murphy beds, our wash tubs, our open steaming pots of collards. Of course, there was a factory just 2 bus rides close, a job that didn't involve babies or bluing laundry, where she worked in tense line with other dreamers, repeatedly, all those oily, hot-combed heads drooping, no talking as scarred brown hands romanced machines, just the sound of doing it right and juicy fruit cracking. A mere mindset away, there had to be a corner tavern where dead bluesmen begged second chances from the jukebox, and where my mama, perched man-weary on a comfortable stool by the door, could look like a Christian who was just leaving. And on Sunday at Pilgrim Rest Missionary Baptist Church, she would pull on the pure white gloves of service and wail to the rafters when the Holy Ghost hot hand grew itchy and insistent at the small of her back. She was his child, finally loosed of that delta, building herself anew in this land of sidewalks, blue jukes, and sizzling fried perch in virgin white boxes. See her, all nap burned from her crown, one gold tooth winking, soft hair riding her lip, blouses starched hard, Orlan sweaters with smatterings of stitched roses, A-line skirts, the color of unleashed winter. My mother's voice is like homemade cornbread, slathered with butter, full of places for heat to hide. When she is pissed, it punches straight out and clears the room. When she is scared, it turns practical, matter of fact, like when she called to say, "They found your daddy this morning. Somebody shot him. He's dead. He ain't come to work this morning. I knew something was wrong." When Mama talks, the southern swing of it is wild with unexpected blooms, like the fields she never told me about in Alabama. Her rap is peppered with ain't gots and I done bins and he bees, just like mine is when I'm color among color. During worship, when talk becomes song, her voice collapses and loses all acquaintance with key. So of course, it's my mother's fractured alto wailing above everything, uncaged, unapologetic, and creaking toward heaven. Now she wants to sound proper when she gets there. A woman got some sense in future need to upright herself, talk English instead of talking wrong. It's strange to hear the precise rote of Annie Pearl's new mouth. She slips sometimes, but is proud when she remembers to bite down on dirt-crafted contractions and double negatives. Sometimes I wonder whatever happened to the warm expanse of the red dust woman who arrived with a little sin and all the good wrong words. I dream her breathless, maybe leaning forward a little in her seat on the Greyhound. "I ain't never seen," she begins, grinning through the grime at Chicago, city of huge shoulders, thief of tongues. Thank you. Thank you. Chicago not only stole my mother's tongue, it stole all of her yesterdays. From the moment her battered shoes touched new ground, she wanted Alabama gone. She wanted nothing more than to scrub the delta from her skin, rid her voice of that ridiculous twang, pretend and then adopt a city sophistication. She thought her ain't gonnas and shoulda dids and ain't and been done had signaled ignorance, backwoods, branded her as one of those old-time Negroes. Even years later, after she had married my father, raised a daughter, and had to know that her corner was not a promised land, but no more than an obscenity of brick, she continued her relentless scrubbing. "I want to talk right before I die," she kept saying, each of her words irreparably Alabama, even after she paid an articulate white woman to please fix the mistake of her throat. And how did my mother's insistence on a blank slate affect me? She slams shut when I ask about the faces in curled corner Polaroids, when I urge her to tell me what kind of girl she was, when I am curious about my mother, father, grandparents, schooling, baptism, about the steamy hamlet of Aliceville, the stores, the schoolhouse. Were you fast? Were you sullen? Did you have that gold tooth then? Did you sing? Before her confounding sense of shame, her "Don't know why you want to know about that nasty old down south stuff anyway," I was robbed of a history that should have been mine as well as hers. My husband, on the other hand, has diligently traced his huge raucous family back to the early 1800s. He has remarkably preserved portraits, marriage licenses, death certificates, farm inventory, a rusted scale from his grandfather's store, even a yellowed handkerchief that has been passed gently from hand to hand for over 100 years. As we pore over the few faded and sun-stained photos my mother has reluctantly parted with, I sound like an impossibility, an orphan with a living parent. "That's my mother," I say, pointing to a teenage stranger with an unmistakable gap-toothed grin. But in every picture, she is surrounded by ghosts. I say, "I don't know who that is. I don't know who that is. I think I know who that is, but I'm not sure," because my mother claims not to remember. In one shot, a ghost turned out to be an aunt I didn't know my mother had. Right now, if I close my eyes and concentrate, I can't hear my mother's voice. I hear something that sounds like her, but it's a tortured hybrid of the voice she had and the one she wanted so much to have. I've told her story time and time again, and I hear other 50-year-old children tell the same stories of their parents who spent whole lives trying to reshape their throats to talk right instead of talking wrong, ashamed of the sound they made in the world. How do we lose our own voices? How do we spend our whole lives safely within the margins of silence? My mother spent her entire life telling me how wrong I was, how my nose was too broad, my hair too crinkled, my skin, Lord, I wish you could have been lighter like your cousin Demetra. Don't tell anyone your stories, she said, your shameful stories of a mama from Alabama, a daddy from Arkansas, an apartment where roaches drop from the ceiling and mice get trapped in the stove, a neighborhood burned down by its own folks right after the riots when that nice Dr. King got killed. Don't tell anyone your stories, stories you should keep to yourself, stories of how your mama and daddy both work in a candy factory, how your aunt lives in the projects, how the apartment we live in has been broken into 3 times. Don't tell anybody you live on the west side, the side everybody tells you to stay away from, and how the school you go to is one of the worst schools in the city. And for goodness sake, girl, talk right. If you want to get out of here ever, you got to talk like white people, and you got to talk about things white people want to hear. In other words, I was to become a clean, colorless slate, scrubbed of my own history, a slate where people could write my life any way they wanted, any beginning, any middle, any outcome. How do we lose our own voices? Follow me now to a 6th grade classroom at Lily C. Evans Elementary School, Dade County, Miami. For 10 years, I traveled from my home to teach for 2 weeks. I came into the classroom the first time all full of idealistic notions, and the area that I was in had a really high incidence of drug use. A lot of the kids had lost parents or brothers or sisters to AIDS, and they wanted to know, what could you possibly say to make our lives better? I was shocked to learn that these 10 and 11-year-olds had already been told that their voices were not legitimate. Look where you live, they've been told. Look who your mama is, who your daddy is. Look how you've lived your whole life in Miami and nobody's ever bothered to take you to the ocean. Look at all those red marks on your papers, all those bad grades on your report card. Look at that house where you live, how there's no locks on the doors. Look at how you've been written off already. In the morning, my kids would come in buzzing about the shots they heard the night before, and if anyone knew what had happened. They came in talking gang signs and beatdowns and who went crazy in church with the Holy Ghost and whose brother was locked up now. But when they sat down to write, it was as if they shed their skins and their stories. They'd sit looking blankly at me, their shoulders sagging from sudden shame and the weight of the world. I can't spell good. I don't have good handwriting. And Miss Smith, I don't have nothing to write about. I spent all my time introducing them to the idea of the second throat. First of all your stories are yours, I told them. I don't care that you've misspelled this word, that you're using double negatives, and I'll figure out that handwriting. What matters is the power that flows through you when you pick up that pen. We're all storytellers, and you can take any story, even stories that wear on your nerves and sag your shoulders. You can take those stories and you can turn them to triumph. You can pick up a pen and make your whole life make sense. The idea that you can take control of how events affect you, and that includes everything you brought into this classroom. The idea you can process that life through language and come out on the other side a better person, a smarter kid, one who doesn't get beat down by circumstance but learns how to learn from it. To Nicole. I am astonished at their mouthful names. Laconicia, Chevalane, DeLeo, Fumaleo, their ragged rebellions and lip gloss pouts and all those pants drooped as drapery. I rejoice when they kiss my face, whisper wet and urgent in my ear, make me their obsession because I have brought them poetry. They shout me raw, bruise my wrist with their pulling, and brashly claim me as mama as they cradle my head in their little laps, waiting for new words to grow in my mouth. You, you, you. Angry, jubilant, weeping poets. We are all saviors, reluctant hosannas in the limelight. But you knew that, didn't you? So let us bless this sixth grade class. 40 cracking voices, 40 nappy heads, and all of them raise their hands when I ask. They have all seen the Reaper, grim in his heavy robe, pushing the button for the Dead Project elevator, begging for a break at the corner pawn shop, cackling wildly in the back pew of the Baptist church. I asked the death question, and 40 fists punched the air. Me! Me! An O'Neill matchstick crack child watched his mother's body become a claw. And 9-year-old Tico Jefferson, barely big enough to lift the gun, fired a bullet into his throat when Mama bended his back with a lead pipe. Tamika cried into a sofa pillow when Daddy blasted Mom into the north wall of their cluttered one-room apartment. Danya's cousin, gone in a drive-by, dark window, click, 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 gone, says Danya, her tiny finger a barrel, the thumb a hammer. I am astonished at their losses. And yet when I read a poem about my own hard-eyed teenager, Jeffrey asks, is he dead yet? Cannot be comprehended. My 18-year-old still pushing and pulling his own breath. And 40 faces pity me, knowing that I will soon be as they are, numb to our bloodied histories, favoring the Reaper with a thumbs up and a wink, hearing the question and shouting, me, Miss Smith, I know somebody dead. Can poetry hurt us, they ask me, before crawling into my words to sleep? I love you, Nicole says. Nicole wearing my face, pimples peppering her nose, and she is as black as angels are. Nicole's braids kissed with match flame to seal them. And can you teach me to write a poem about my mama, Miss Smith? I mean, you write about your daddy, and he's dead. Can you teach me to remember my mama? A teacher tells me this is the first time Nicole has admitted that her mother is gone. Murdered by slim silver needles and a stranger rifling through her blood, the virus pushing her skeleton through for Nicole to see. And now this child with rusty knees and mismatched shoes sees poetry as her scream and asks me for the words to build her mother again, replacing the voice, stitching on the lost flesh. So poets, as we take the stage, as we flirt and sin and rejoice behind microphones, remember Nicole. She knows that we are here now, and she is an empty vessel waiting to be filled. And she is waiting, and she is waiting, and she waits. And they wait. They wait for you. They wait for me. The quiet boy with the glasses falling down his nose and with his mind tangled in math is waiting for you. That girl who dressed 2 sizes too blue is waiting for you. The child who never lifts his eyes is really looking at you, through you, and is waiting. That tall, lanky boy who lives to make everyone laugh is waiting for you. That one white child in a sea of black is waiting for you. That one black child in a sea of white is waiting. The one who takes the bus in from the suburbs is waiting for you. Not just the children with the hard, untellable stories, the stories they hold shamed and close to their chest, but any child with a yesterday is looking for a way to sing tomorrow. They wait for you to open another door beyond verb and adjective, punctuation and equation, beyond memorized fact and pop quiz and line and intersection and angle and structure and margin. They wait for you to open a door that leads them to their own lives. So there is hope. Every single time I walk into a classroom, I tell my story, the story of my parents in the South, the story of growing up in a place that was expected to defeat me. I celebrate every single word a child says, every movement of their pen on paper, and I'm mesmerized when their stories begin to emerge. I stop what I'm doing and I listen. We've got to teach that every utterance, every story is legitimate, that they exist to help you process your own life, to help you move your own life forward, not to complete anyone else's picture of you. Never relinquish control of your own life, you must say, and the stories that have formed you. Write them down and read them to yourselves if no one else wants to hear. My mother used to say, ain't nobody trying to hear that nonsense. In the beginning, it doesn't matter if anyone wants to hear. What matters is what you have to say. I've told you about my mother and about the tragedy of a voice lost, but I can't leave unless I tell you a little bit about my daddy, a man who gleefully crossed margins and shattered boundaries. Grizzled and slight, the flasher of a marquee tooth, Otis Douglas Smith was Arkansas grit, suddenly sporting city clothes. He was also part of the great migration of blacks from the South to the northern cities. He found himself not in the urban Mecca he imagined, but in a cramped apartment on Chicago's west side. While many of those urban refugees struggled to fit, my daddy never really adopted the no-nonsense rhythm of the city. He never handed his story over. There was too much of the storyteller in him, too much unleashed Southern song still waiting for the open air. From the earliest days I can recall, my place was on his lap, touching a hand to his stubbled cheek and listening to his growled narrative, mysterious whispers, and wide-open laughter. Because of him, I grew to think of the world in terms of the stories it could tell. From my father's moonlit tales of steaming Delta magic to the sweet, slow songs of Smokey Robinson, I became addicted to unfolding drama, winding narrative threads, the lyricism of simple words. I believe that we all lived in the midst of an ongoing adventure that begged for voice, and in my quest for that voice, I found poetry. The one thing my daddy taught me to do was to listen and tell and cook. The recipe for hot water cornbread is simple. Cornmeal, hot water. Mix till sluggish, then dollop in a sizzling skillet. When you smell the burning begin, flip it. When you smell the burning begin again, dump it onto a plate. You've got to wait for the burning and get it just right. Before the bread cools down, smear it with sweet salted butter and smash it with your fingers. Crumble it up in a bowl of collard greens or buttermilk. Forget that I'm telling you, it's the first thing that I ever cooked, that my daddy was laughing and breathing and no bullet in his head when he taught me. Mix it till it looks like quicksand, he'd say, till it moves like a slow song sounds. That stuff pops something awful with that blazing skillet, and sometimes Daddy and I would dance to those angry pop sounds. He'd let me rest my feet on top of his while we waltzed around the kitchen, and my mother huffed and puffed on the other side of the door. When you are famous, Daddy asked me, will you write about dancing in the kitchen with your father? I say everything I write will be about you. Then you will be famous too. And we dip and swirl and spin, but then he stops and sniffs the air. The thing you have to remember about hot water cornbread is to wait for the burning so you know when to flip it, and then again so you know when it's crusty and done. Then eat it the way we did, with our fingers, our feet still tingling from dancing. But remember that sometimes the burning takes such a long time, and in that time, sometimes poems are born. Poetry was the undercurrent of every story I heard and read. It was the essence, the bones, and the pulse. I could think of no better way to communicate than with a poem where pretense is stripped away, leaving only what is beautiful and vital. So like you, and you, and you, I'm a storyteller, and with firm and feverish guidance, so are your students. We only get one life, and we must inhabit it fully. We must celebrate and mourn and lash out and question and believe and argue and explore and love and dismiss and fight on the page, on the stage, and in the classroom. Say to your students until even you are tired of hearing it, no one is authorized to tell your story but you. And if there is shame in that story, you own that shame and you turn it into lesson. If there is darkness in your story, you write toward the light. If there are words you don't want anyone else to hear, you hold those words close. On the other hand, if there is joy threaded throughout that story, you sing it loud enough to rock the rafters. If there is triumph, and there will always be in some measure, you pull everyone within the sound of your voice, within shouting distance of your pen, into that circle of light. A teacher standing in front of a classroom is a little bit of religion. It doesn't matter if you're in Portland or Philadelphia or Kentucky or Indianapolis, whether you're overpaid or overlooked, whether your students soar through their AP classes or stumble through single-syllable words, whether your school is 5 rooms or 5 stories, it doesn't matter if the building is drab and fallen and surrounded by a dying neighborhood or glittering and expansive enough to brag its own zip code. It doesn't matter whether your students are colored like snow or sand or soil. For every minute you stand before them, you are the beacon, the whole of possibility, the keeper of the second throat. Like it or not, you are often the first chapter in the story they're writing with their lives. Their parents taught them to speak. Now you must teach them to speak aloud, to keep on speaking, to scream and to sing. Now you must teach them to speak aloud, to keep on speaking, to scream and to sing. Inside margins that frighten, inhabit, and cripple them, they wait. So many of them have lost their voices. Outside those damnable margins, where there is light and possibility and promise, there you are. You take a first step toward them, and what you're holding in your hands are their voices. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.